The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting a warm, golden glow over the quiet town. It was St. Francis Day, a cherished occasion in the community where people brought their beloved pets to the church for a blessing. The tradition, honoring the patron saint of animals, filled the streets with an unusual liveliness. Soft barks, cheerful chatter, and the gentle rustling of carriers filled with curious creatures. Amid the bustling crowd was Eleanor, a retired schoolteacher with a gentle demeanor and a deep love for animals. At her side, in a simple but well-loved carrier, was her cat, Oliver. He was a reserved creature, known for his quiet companionship and intuitive nature. Over the years, Oliver had become more than just a pet to Eleanor. He was her confidant, her comfort in moments of solitude. As Eleanor approached the church, she adjusted the strap of Oliver's carrier, speaking to him in a soothing tone. "It's a special day for you too, Oliver," she said with a small smile. "Let's get you blessed, The stone church stood tall at the center of the town, its doors wide open to welcome the community. The soft murmur of prayers and the faint scent of incense drifted out, blending with the crisp autumn air. Inside, families and their pets were gathering, the pews filling with a mix of wagging tails, flapping wings, and curious eyes peeking out of carriers. Eleanor found a spot near the back, setting Oliver's carrier gently on the floor beside her. She opened the top, allowing him to peek out and take in the unfamiliar sights and sounds. The cat's golden eyes scanned the room with quiet curiosity, his ears twitching at the soft hum of the organ and the occasional bark or chirp from the other animals. The priest stood at the front, dressed in traditional robes, his voice calm and steady as he welcomed everyone to the special service. He spoke of St. Francis's love for all creatures, his belief in the sacred connection between humans and animals, and the importance of honoring that bond. Eleanor listened intently, her hand resting on Oliver's head as the priest's words resonated with her own feelings about her beloved companion. As the blessing began, the congregation formed a line, each person bringing their pet forward to receive the priest's prayer. Dogs wagged their tails excitedly, birds chirped melodiously, and even a few rabbits wiggled their noses with curiosity. Eleanor watched with a warm smile, her heart swelling at the sight of so much love and care in one place. When it was her turn, she lifted Oliver from the carrier and held him close, his soft fur brushing against her cheek. "Come on, Oliver," she murmured. "Let's get you your blessing." As they approached the front of the church, Oliver's usual calm demeanor shifted slightly. He tensed in her arms, his ears flicking back and forth as though he were attuned to something beyond the room. Eleanor frowned, her grip tightening slightly as she tried to soothe him. "It's okay, darling," she whispered, "almost done." The priest extended his hand toward Oliver, his voice gentle as he began the prayer. But before he could finish, Oliver let out a soft but insistent meow that echoed through the church. The sound was unusual, not distressed but purposeful, almost as if the cat were trying to draw attention. The congregation fell silent, their gazes shifting to Eleanor and her cat. The priest paused, his hand hovering over Oliver as he regarded the animal with quiet curiosity. Eleanor's cheeks flushed, her heart racing as she looked down at Oliver. "What's gotten into you?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. Oliver wriggled slightly in her arms, his eyes fixed on the priest with an intensity that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. It was as though he were trying to communicate something, his usual quiet nature replaced with a quiet urgency that she couldn't quite understand. The priest, seemingly unfazed, smiled gently and placed his hand on Oliver's head. "He's a special one," he said softly, his tone filled with warmth. "Sometimes animals sense things we cannot." Eleanor nodded, though her mind buzzed with questions. As the priest completed the blessing, Oliver let out one final meow, his gaze never wavering. It was a moment that seemed to hang in the air, the quiet church filled with an unspoken energy that no one could quite explain. As Eleanor returned to her seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just in Oliver, but in the room itself. The congregation resumed their blessings, the soft murmur of voices filling the space once more. But Eleanor's thoughts remained with her cat, his unusual behavior sparking a sense of wonder and curiosity that lingered long after the service continued. The service continued with its usual grace, the priest offering blessings to the remaining pets as the congregation observed in quiet reverence. Eleanor sat back in her pew, her hands gently cradling Oliver, who now seemed unusually alert. His golden eyes scanned the room with an intensity that felt almost out of place, and Eleanor couldn't help but wonder what had prompted his sudden change in behavior. As the final blessing concluded, the priest offered a closing prayer, his voice echoing softly through the church. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her, but her focus was continually pulled back to the cat in her arms. Oliver remained unusually still, his ears flicking occasionally as though he were listening to something beyond the sounds of the room. When the service ended, the congregation began to disperse, their conversations mingling with the gentle hum of animals being gathered and carriers being zipped shut. Eleanor hesitated, glancing down at Oliver before deciding to stay seated for a few moments longer. She wasn't ready to leave, not with the lingering feeling that something more was unfolding. "Eleanor," came a familiar voice, breaking her thoughts. She looked up to see Father Thomas, the priest, approaching with a warm smile. "It's always a pleasure to see you here." She returned the smile, adjusting Oliver slightly in her arms. "Thank you, Father. It's a beautiful service, as always." Father Thomas's gaze shifted to Oliver, his expression softening. And this must be Oliver. I could tell he's quite a special cat. His reaction earlier, it was remarkable. Eleanor's cheeks flushed slightly, a mix of pride and embarrassment. "I'm not sure what got into him," she admitted. "He's usually so calm, but today he's been different. It's like he was trying to tell us something." Father Thomas nodded thoughtfully, his hand resting on the back of the pew. "Animals have a way of sensing things we often overlook," he said. Perhaps Oliver felt something that touched his spirit. The words lingered in Eleanor's mind, their weight both comforting and mysterious. She glanced at Oliver, who was now watching Father Thomas intently, his eyes reflecting an almost knowing light. "Maybe," she murmured, stroking his fur. "I've always felt there's something unique about him, but I can't quite put it into words." As the other attendees filed out, a few paused to comment on Oliver's earlier behavior. "Your cat has quite the presence," one woman remarked with a kind smile. It was like he was speaking for all of us. Another added, "I've never seen anything like it." There was something so meaningful about the way he reacted. Eleanor thanked them politely, though their words only deepened her curiosity. By the time the church had emptied, she felt a quiet sense of anticipation, as though Oliver's actions were the start of something she couldn't yet understand. Father Thomas lingered as well, his gaze thoughtful as he watched Eleanor gather her things. "Eleanor," he said gently, "if you'd like, you're welcome to stay a little longer. Sometimes the quiet moments after a service are the most revealing." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Father. I think I will." As the priest returned to the altar, Eleanor set Oliver back into his carrier, leaving the top open so he could move freely. She remained seated, her hands clasped in her lap, her thoughts swirling with questions. What had prompted Oliver's unusual behavior? Was it simply the unfamiliar environment, or was there something deeper at play? The soft creak of the church doors opening interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor turned to see an elderly man entering, his movements slow but purposeful. He carried a small scruffy dog in his arms, the animal's fur matted and its eyes dull with exhaustion. The man approached the altar hesitantly, his weathered face etched with a mix of hope and sorrow. Eleanor watched quietly as Father Thomas greeted the man, his voice too low for her to hear. The priest extended his hands in blessing over the dog, whose fragile body trembled slightly in its owner's arms. The sight tugged at Eleanor's heart, a reminder of the profound connection between humans and their animals. But then, something unexpected happened. Oliver let out a soft meow, drawing both Eleanor's attention and that of the priest and the man at the altar. The cat stood, his posture alert, his gaze fixed on the small dog. Without hesitation, Oliver leaped gracefully from his carrier, landing softly on the stone floor and padding toward the altar. "Oliver," Eleanor called softly, rising from her seat. She hesitated to stop him, sensing that this moment carried a significance she couldn't yet grasp. Father Thomas and the elderly man turned, their expressions a mix of surprise and curiosity as Oliver approached. The cat paused a few feet from the altar, his golden eyes locked onto the dog, who whimpered softly in response. Then, with deliberate slowness, Oliver moved closer, brushing his head gently against the dog's side. A hush fell over the room, the air thick with an unspoken energy. The dog, previously trembling, seemed to relax under Oliver's touch, its breathing evening out as its eyes closed briefly. The elderly man's face crumpled with emotion, tears streaming down his cheeks as he held the dog closer. Eleanor's breath caught, her hands trembling as she watched the scene unfold. Father Thomas placed a hand over his heart, his voice soft as he murmured, "Sometimes blessings come in ways we least expect." Oliver lingered for a moment longer before turning and padding back to Eleanor, his movements calm and purposeful. He leaped back into her lap, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. In that moment, Eleanor felt a deep sense of peace, as though Oliver had fulfilled a purpose greater than she could understand. The church remained silent, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone present. Eleanor held Oliver close, her hands trembling as she tried to process what she had witnessed. The elderly man at the altar cradled his dog, his expression a mixture of awe and gratitude as he turned to Father Thomas. "Thank you," the man murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what just happened, but it feels like a miracle." Father Thomas smiled gently, his eyes glancing toward Oliver. "Perhaps it was," he said softly. "St. Francis teaches us that animals are vessels of love and compassion. Sometimes they show us what we cannot see ourselves." The elderly man nodded, his gaze dropping to his dog, who now rested peacefully in his arms. The trembling that had marked the animal's frail body moments ago had vanished, replaced by an unusual stillness. It was as if the simple gesture from Oliver, a nuzzle, a quiet presence, had eased something deeper than just physical pain. Eleanor felt her chest tighten, a rush of emotions swirling within her. She wanted to say something, to explain what Oliver had done, but words escaped her. Instead, she looked down at her cat, whose calm demeanor had returned as if nothing unusual had occurred. His golden eyes met hers briefly, steady and unshaken, before he curled into her lap. The elderly man approached her, his steps slow but purposeful. "That's your cat, isn't it?" he asked, his voice soft but tinged with wonder. "Yes," Eleanor replied, her voice trembling. "His name is Oliver." The man offered a small, trembling smile. "Thank you," he said simply. What he did, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. My dog, she's been sick for so long, but right now she looks so peaceful." Eleanor blinked back tears, her heart swelling with pride and a strange sense of humility. "I didn't know he could do that," she admitted. "He's always been special, but today, it feels like he's more than that." Father Thomas joined them, his expression thoughtful as he knelt to pet the elderly man's dog. "Animals have a way of showing us what truly matters," he said. "They remind us of the power of connection, of care, and of quiet, unspoken blessings." Eleanor nodded, her hand resting on Oliver's soft fur. She thought of all the times Oliver had comforted her during her loneliest days, how his presence had brought her peace in ways no one else could. Today, it felt as though he had shared that gift with someone else, as if his quiet understanding extended far beyond her. As the elderly man returned to the altar for a final prayer, the remaining churchgoers, who had lingered in quiet awe, began to approach Eleanor. One by one, they spoke of what they had seen, their voices hushed with reverence. "I've never seen a cat act like that," one woman said, her tone filled with wonder. "It was like he knew exactly what that dog needed." Another added, "It felt like more than just an animal's instinct. It was purposeful." Eleanor smiled faintly, though her mind buzzed with questions. She looked to Father Thomas, whose gaze remained fixed on Oliver. "Father," she began, her voice uncertain, Do you think this was a sign?" Father Thomas tilted his head, considering her words carefully. "I think," he said after a pause, "that sometimes blessings come in ways we don't expect. Whether it's a sign or simply a moment of grace, it reminds us of the divine love that flows through all living things." His words resonated deeply with Eleanor, sending a shiver down her spine. She glanced at Oliver, who now rested quietly in her lap, his body warm and steady against her hands. It was as if he had done what needed to be done and was now at peace. As the other churchgoers began to leave, Eleanor stayed behind, feeling the need to linger in the quiet stillness of the church. The elderly man offered one final thank you before departing. His dog nestled securely in his arms. The sight of them leaving together filled Eleanor with a quiet joy, knowing that Oliver had given them something special, something intangible, but undeniably real. Father Thomas approached her once more, his voice low as he spoke. "Eleanor, perhaps Oliver was meant to be here today. Animals often have a way of showing us the sacred in the everyday." Eleanor nodded, her hand brushing gently against Oliver's fur. "He's always been a comfort to me," she said. "But today, it feels like he's so much more." Father Thomas smiled warmly. "Cherish that, Eleanor. Not everyone gets to witness something so profound." As the church doors closed behind the last of the attendees, Eleanor sat quietly with Oliver, the echoes of the day lingering in the stillness around her. She couldn't explain what had happened, but deep down, she felt a sense of peace and purpose she hadn't known before. Oliver's actions had touched more than just one life. They had reminded everyone present of the quiet, miraculous ways love and compassion could manifest. And as she finally rose to leave, Oliver nestled securely in her arms. Eleanor knew one thing for certain. This St. Francis Day would be a memory she carried with her forever. As Eleanor stepped out of the church with Oliver cradled in her arms, the crisp autumn air greeted her with a gentle breeze. The town square was quieter now, the earlier bustle of St. Francis Day fading into the late afternoon. She walked slowly, her mind swirling with the events of the morning. What had Oliver done? And why did it feel so significant? The elderly man and his dog were seated on a nearby bench beneath the shade of a large oak tree. Eleanor hesitated before approaching, unsure if she should intrude. But as she drew closer, the man looked up and offered her a smile, his expression lighter than it had been earlier. "She's resting," the man said softly, gesturing to the dog curled up at his side. "I haven't seen her this calm in months." Eleanor sat beside him, Oliver shifting slightly in her lap to peer at the pair. The dog, though frail, exuded a peacefulness that seemed to radiate from within. "I'm glad," Eleanor said sincerely. "She's lucky to have you." The man chuckled lightly, his hand brushing over the dog's fur. "And I think your Oliver had something to do with this. It's strange. I've taken her to the vet, tried every remedy I could find, but nothing ever seemed to help. Yet today, after just a moment with your cat—" He trailed off, shaking his head as if he couldn't quite believe it. Eleanor didn't know how to respond. She looked down at Oliver, who met her gaze with his calm, golden eyes. "I can't explain it," she admitted, "but it feels like he knew what she needed, like he was meant to help." The man nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Maybe he was. Animals have a way of showing us things we can't always see. And today, well, it felt like a blessing." The word hung in the air between them, its weight both comforting and mysterious. Eleanor thought of Father Thomas's words, of the way Oliver had seemed to take on a purpose larger than himself. It wasn't the first time she'd felt there was something special about her cat, but today had been different, more profound, more tangible. As they sat in quiet reflection, a group of children ran by, their laughter echoing through the square. One of the girls paused, her eyes lighting up as she spotted Oliver. "A kitty!" she exclaimed, her small hands reaching out hesitantly. "Can I pet him?" Eleanor smiled, nodding gently. "Of course. His name is Oliver." The girl approached carefully, her fingers brushing against Oliver's fur. The cat remained still, his golden eyes watching the child with a quiet curiosity. "He's so soft," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Is he a magic kitty?" Eleanor chuckled softly, her heart warming at the child's innocence. "He's very special," she said, "but I think the magic comes from the love he shares." The girl giggled, giving Oliver one last gentle pat before running back to her friends. As Eleanor watched her go, she couldn't help but think about the moments of connection Oliver had created today, not just with the dog, but with everyone who had witnessed his quiet act of compassion. The elderly man spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You know, I wasn't sure if coming to the church today was the right thing to do. She's been so weak and I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. But now, I feel like it was meant to happen." Eleanor nodded, her gaze softening as she looked at Oliver. "I think so too. Sometimes the most unexpected moments bring us exactly what we need." The man smiled, a quiet gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Eleanor, and thank you, Oliver. You've given me hope when I thought there was none left." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the square, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. Today had been more than just a blessing for Oliver. It had been a reminder of the beauty and power of connection, of the quiet ways love could ripple through the world. And as she stood to leave, Oliver still nestled in her arms, she felt lighter, as though the events of the day had filled her heart with a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever had happened in that church, it was something she would carry with her forever, a moment of grace that would never fade. The walk home was quiet, the soft crunch of leaves beneath Eleanor's feet, the only sound accompanying her thoughts. Oliver lay contentedly in her arms, his body warm and relaxed. The events of the day played over and over in her mind. The unusual energy in the church, the elderly man's gratitude, the peaceful transformation in his dog. It all felt surreal, like a story she might recount one day, though she knew the memory would forever feel as vivid as the moment it happened. As they neared the gate to her small cottage, Eleanor paused, looking down at Oliver. "You've always been special," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "but today you were something more. Thank you, my love." Oliver responded with a soft purr, his golden eyes meeting hers briefly before he nestled his head against her arm. Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling with affection and pride for her quiet companion. She opened the gate and stepped inside, the familiar comfort of home embracing her as she sat Oliver down gently. The day unfolded in small, tender rituals. Eleanor brewed a pot of tea. Oliver perched on the windowsill to watch the last rays of sunlight filter through the trees. The peace of the evening felt heightened, as though the air itself carried the echoes of the day's blessings. As night fell, Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair, a blanket draped over her lap, and Oliver curled up beside her. She stroked his fur absent-mindedly, her mind drifting back to the words Father Thomas had spoken. Sometimes blessings come in ways we don't expect. It was true. Today had been a reminder that love and grace often appeared in the most ordinary of moments, carried by the quiet presence of those we hold dear. Whether or not Oliver's actions could be called miraculous, Eleanor knew one thing for certain. He had changed something, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed his quiet act of compassion. In the days that followed, the story of Oliver's gesture spread through the town. Neighbors stopped Eleanor on the street to ask about her cat, their curiosity mingled with awe. The elderly man visited her cottage one afternoon, his dog by his side, to thank her again for the unexpected kindness that had brought him peace. "It wasn't me," Eleanor told him gently. "It was Oliver." The man smiled, his hand resting on his dog's head. "Maybe so. But you've both reminded me that hope can come from the unlikeliest places." Eleanor nodded, her heart warm with the knowledge that her beloved Oliver had left an indelible mark on the lives around him. As she watched the man and his dog walk away, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. St. Francis Day had always been a special tradition, but this year it had become something much more, a day she would cherish forever. That evening, as Eleanor sat by the fire with Oliver in her lap, she leaned down to kiss the top of his head. "You've always been a blessing, Oliver," she whispered, "and today the world saw it too." Oliver purred softly, his golden eyes glowing in the firelight. In that moment, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the events of the day, but for the simple, quiet love that had filled her life since the day she had brought Oliver home. It was a love that didn't need words, a connection that went beyond understanding. And it was enough. If this story of love, connection, and unexpected blessings touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's celebrate the quiet miracles that remind us of the beauty in everyday life.